Hello, I'm Scott Bushnell, Advertising Creative Director for the Kennedy Center. I'm here in the Eisenhower Theater Green Room, one of my favorite spaces at the center. It's like a visual timeline where I can trace my 34 years working here. One of the most fun parts of my job is creating show posters. Posters can tell you a lot about a show or lure you in with an air of mystery. They are treasured mementos for performers and perfect souvenirs for adoring fans. Over the past 50 years, many amazing shows have passed through these halls. As part of our archival exhibit, we've created 50 It's in the Air, an installation of 5 decades of posters hanging in the Hall of States and Hall of Nations. Suspended from the ceiling are hundreds of original posters from our archives, spanning from the 1970s through today. Some have famous faces, some feature beautiful illustrations, and others use bold graphics to grab your attention. Over the years, some famous artists have contributed to this iconic gallery, like Hilary Knight, Al Hirschfeld, Edward Gorey, and Broadway poster designer Fraver, who I know better as my friend, Frank Verlizzo. I recently had a conversation with Frank about some of the memorable posters he has created especially for the Kennedy Center. I hope you enjoy our chat about what goes into making a memorable poster. Hi, Frank. It's so great to see you. We've worked together many times over the past 20 years, but not often in person. Of course, you're a famous Broadway poster designer. You go by Fraver, which is a combination of your first and last names. Even if people don't recognize your name, if they're any kind of Broadway fan, they're going to recognize your work. From The Lion King to the original posters for Sunday in the Park with George and Sweeney Todd. And of course, that brings us to the first project that we worked on together, which was the Kennedy Center Sondheim celebration in 2002. Our president, Michael Kaiser, devised an unprecedented tribute to composer and lyricist Stephen Sondheim that featured 6 new productions of his musicals with Broadway stars, a Japanese production of Pacific Overtures, a children's production of Into the Woods, and many other things. It was a huge project, and in fact, in your book, you devote a whole chapter to Sondheim. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to get that assignment?
Max Woodward had contacted me, and I think it was because I had a history of, as you already said, I worked on the original Sweeney Todd and Sunday in the Park. I had also designed art for Stephen Sondheim's only play that he wrote with George Firth, Getting Away with Murder. And I had done an off-Broadway Pacific Overtures earlier also. So I think that probably put me at the top of the list when they were thinking of an artist to call, which was great. It was a very daunting assignment, obviously. When I remember a lot of folks came up from the Kennedy Center to meet my office, and I had no idea what the assignment was yet. So they were all explaining it to me. And it was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger as they were speaking. And I was starting to freak out a little bit. But once I calmed down, it was great. I had, I think they gave me almost the whole summer to come up with campaign ideas and poster ideas. And then I did my major presentation. There were a lot of people there, I guess. But I had the original assignment, interestingly enough, was that they wanted one poster to encompass the entire event. It was one of my concepts in my posters was the one that they wound up using with the 9 blocks, which then meant there were 9 other images to design. Once they saw that direction, they kind of abandoned the idea of just one image for the whole event. I also think it helped give them a much bigger or broader avenue for merchandising, which I think they had in mind. And yeah, it was amazing. It was strange revisiting shows I had done already. That was kind of fun. And it was really great working on the musicals I had never worked on before and never thought I was going to get a chance to work on. So that was pretty fabulous.
Our next project, 2 years later, was another festival devoted to a playwright, Tennessee Williams Explored. Again, 3 iconic plays that have had many productions and even been made into movies. So how did you find a fresh angle on these shows that already have so much imagery associated with them?
Well, the challenge there is exactly what you said. What was that they're so famous. There's so many iterations of them, but the imagery for each show to me seems very clear from show to show. Actually, I think in one of my phone calls with Max Woodward, where he would say, well, when you're working on glass, so when you're working on cat, and we would just use one word, we wouldn't use the whole title. And I thought that might be kind of a interesting thing, because if you say streetcar, everybody knows what show you're talking about. That's what brought me to the graphic concept. Big graphic word with the imagery within it was the thing that spoke to everyone, which I was very glad about. I liked it a lot.
And I think that treatment also helped pull it together as a festival. So the three posters really went together visually as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Next up was MAME in 2006, which starred Christine Baranski. And when you were first designing this poster, the casting had not been completed. So does that make it easier or harder?
Well, it would be easier if it remained without a star, because everything I was working on did not have a star in it or wasn't a star-centric. Once she was cast, though, it really did take me into another direction. I obviously wanted to focus on her. I think it actually helped me because the original Broadway poster for Maine, which Bill Berta designed, is very famous, and I was sort of intimidated by the impact that poster's had and still has today. So once I knew that I could focus on Christine Baranski's image, that lifted it away from anything that was already done, and that helped me a lot. And I specifically used a whole different color palette rather than the golds that they used in the original. I went with roses and pinks and more deco colors.
Did you ever hear from her about your portrait of her?
No, actually, I met her after one of the performances. Everybody went out to dinner, and she was very nice, very complimentary.
Cool. So have you had other shows that have changed from when you first designed the poster to when it actually is on Broadway?
Very rarely. On Broadway, it was by the time they were heavy into the marketing aspect, they pretty much had their ducks in a row. You guys were always working on a real tight time on it. So you sort of had to do things way in advance. Although on Broadway we do it in advance, it's not being printed. I mean, all the work's done, but there's like nothing written in stone yet. So it's a little easier to adjust. But yeah, so I've never had an issue quite like that. Maine was definitely one of a kind.
Next was my favorite Sondheim show, Follies, in 2011. Now, part of your origin story is that as a young designer at Pratt Institute, you had David Edward Byrd as your professor. And of course, he designed the iconic original poster for Follies with the cracked face of the showgirl. How was it to redesign a poster of your mentor and probably one of his most famous works?
Well, it was horrifying, to tell you the truth, but it turned out to be pleasant. But it is, without a doubt, the most famous theater poster ever. So aside from knowing David Byrd and, admiring his work, you're up against that iconic image. I went into an initial panic, as I usually do anyway with any show, but more so with this because of David. But I decided I would just write to him. So I wrote him an email and told him about the assignment and how excited I was, but I was also hesitant. And he wrote me this lovely, funny, hysterical email back, telling me just to calm down and enjoy it. And, it's the most glamorous project you'll ever have, so you should really just enjoy every minute of it. And that's basically what I did. And once again, the Kennedy Center gave me quite a few months to work on a presentation, and that was really helpful.
And actually, that was one of the few Kennedy Center production posters that did not change when it went to Broadway.
Right.
So it pretty much was your same design. The billing changed.
The billing, yeah. We did not have that billing at the Kennedy Center. But yeah, I actually thought as a whole, it it remained the same, which was very, very gratifying because you know how often the art changes from one venue to another. So I was pretty glad about that.
The Guardsman in 2013 is another example of a show art changing from subscription brochure to final production, but it wasn't really because of billing. In this case, the original brief from the director was that it was a broad comedy. So when you did the artwork, it was very bright and colorful. It had bouncing type. But then the show was cast and the director decided to take a more serious approach. So we ended up doing a photo of the two leads with Brigitte Lacombe in New York, and a black and white photo, and it became a much more romantic, serious production. So have you ever worked on any shows in development where the visual approaches changed that drastically from your first concepts to the final product?
I can't say that it changed. Once again, the procedure when I'm dealing with Broadway is slightly different, but there were shows, one in particular, I had designed the poster for the Broadway production of 12 Angry Men, and they used a very, very graphic image I had designed. It was literally all type, and it was very successful. Everybody loved the art. Actually, it was written about quite a bit, which I loved. But when the show was about to announce a tour, they cast stars in the tour. So that totally changed what they wanted to do for the road. And we wound up doing a photo shoot with the two stars. And they abandoned the graphic image totally.
Sideshow in 2014 was also like this. You designed a logo type for our season brochure, a graphic image. But once we had the cast, I worked with photographer Cade Martin to take a portrait of the two leads. And we ended up using that photo in combination with your type treatment of the title on the final poster. The project was also fun because of the special effects of the freaks in the show. And we had Joan Marcus, who used to be our in-house photographer, who's now went on to become a famous Broadway photographer. She took individual portraits of the freaks. And just as a fun side project for myself, I ended up making trading cards of each of the characters. And we ended up using them on social media. So you kind of met the freaks individually.
Right.
And I kind of put it together in a poster, but it also incorporated your type treatment of Sideshow on the cards. So have you ever been involved in the merchandising aspect of these shows, like designing products from your designs?
Very few. I mean, the merchandising, even for the most famous shows I've worked on, most Broadway shows, like Sweeney Todd and Sunday in the Park, really, merchandising wasn't really a thing. Merchandising meant a hat and a T-shirt and a button.
Yeah.
That was it. So it was a whole different thing. Of course, with something like Lion King, it's, I mean, how do you even begin to describe that? So that's a whole nother way of doing it. But I wasn't really involved in any of the designing of merchandise.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it seems like today they do a lot of things now, like take lines from the show and put them on a T-shirt or things like that. So it's not always just the logo art. So the last show I want to talk about is Little Dancer from 2014, which was the same year. It was a busy year. That was a new musical from Lynn Ahrens and Stephen Flaherty based on Degas' sculpture, Little Dancer, age 14. So can you talk a little bit about your approach to this subject?
Yeah. The main directive that I had gotten from Michael Kaiser and Max Woodward was they did not want to see the statue. I thought that was kind of, wow, really? Okay. Because it seemed like that's what would make it the title Little Dancer make sense. But I wound up skirting around it, and many of the posters I designed used like silhouettes of the statue or a different version of what you would recognize instantly as the statue. The piece that you guys wound up choosing has a silhouette of the statue within a painting of Degas' profile. The silhouette of that statue is so famous, you don't need to see the statue. So I thought that was pretty successful, and it was a gorgeous production after I had, when I finally see the show after all my work, it's amazing to sit there and think, wow, this is so gorgeous. I can't believe it. I wish I had known this. I wish I knew they were going to do that. I wish, so it's all in retrospect.
It was very interesting because I think, your piece has a lot of brushwork, and that was actually part of the set, was the paintings were being painted through video projection on the scenery. So I think it really connected well. The other thing I liked about the design you came up with is that it really emphasized the relationship between Degas and Marie, which was the point of the show. And I think if you just had a picture of the statue, you don't really get that by itself. You don't really get that relationship between the artist and his muse. So I think that was a great connection there.
A dancer's dream, an artist's vision, a remarkable story. Don't miss Little Dancer, the world premiere Kennedy Center musical.
Another fun thing about this project is we got to animate your art for a TV spot. Given that Broadway campaigns use so many media channels these days, has that changed your approach from just designing for a 2D image on a poster?
Not really. I'm much more conceptual, and then decide how I want to approach the artwork part of it once I have the concept. The only show that comes to my mind was a very successful off-Broadway production of Our Town that David Cromer directed, where I knew they were going to want to animate the artwork, but that really was way in the back of my mind when I was coming up with the imagery. But yeah, no, it wouldn't really change anything for me.
If they are going to do things with your artwork, have you been involved in reviewing it or?
Oh yeah, actually, Our Town piece, I designed the animation as well, but that was it was a very simple piece of art. So, certainly wasn't extravagant or anything. It's a whole different thing. To me, it's doing the animation and visual on a screen is way different than what I'm doing on a two-dimensional board. So I hold the two things very separate and much prefer the board to the screen.
Well, Frank, it's been a lot of fun revisiting these projects that we've collaborated on over the years. They're all an important part of the Kennedy Center's history.
Being a part of the history of the Kennedy Center is beyond my wildest dream. I really, really have always loved the Kennedy Center. And being a part of the Kennedy Center since 2002 has really been wonderful. The projects have been amazing. I could never even imagine working on a Tennessee Williams Festival and a Stephen Sondheim celebration, and that's just amazing to me. And the fact that it gave me a great excuse to travel up to Washington, so that was always fun. And no, it's just really been very special. I've always loved it. The toughest part was trying to get to the presentations on time from the train station. Aside from that, it was okay.
And here's hoping we can do more great work together in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.